The package arrived without a return address. No stamp, no courier label, just a worn, gray cardboard box sitting quietly outside the apartment door, as if it had always been there. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. At the time, I told myself it was just a delayed shipment, something I had ordered weeks ago and forgotten about. But there was a problem with that explanation. I hadn't ordered anything recently. At least, nothing that would come in a box like that. Still, I picked it up. It was heavier than expected. Not excessively heavy, but dense. As if whatever was inside had no empty space around it. The cardboard felt slightly damp, even though the hallway was dry.
There was no smell at first.
Just that faint, cold sensation that clings to your skin when you touch something that has been sitting in the dark for too long. I brought it inside. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet, in a way I didn't notice until later. No traffic noise from outside. No distant voices from neighbors. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed lower than usual. I placed the box on the kitchen table and just stood there, looking at it, waiting for something, though I didn't know what. That's when I noticed the writing. It wasn't on top. It was on the side, near the bottom edge, written in thin black ink. The letters were small, almost deliberate, like someone had taken their time to make sure they were neat. Do not open alone. I felt a brief, instinctive unease. Then I laughed. It sounded like a joke. A cheap attempt at making the package feel mysterious. Maybe part of some online marketing gimmick. I had seen stranger things on obscure forums before, especially on the deeper parts of the internet, where people sold things designed purely to unsettle. And that's when it came back to me. The purchase. It had been late, past 2 a.m. I had been scrolling through a hidden marketplace buried several layers beneath encrypted directories. A place where listings didn't have reviews, where sellers didn't use real names, where everything was labeled in vague, unsettling ways. I remembered the listing clearly now. Mystery box, authentic. No refunds. No explanations. The price had been low enough to ignore the risk. Curiosity had done the rest. I never expected it to actually arrive. But now it had. And it was sitting on my table. I walked around it slowly, as if examining something alive. The tape sealing the top was old, slightly yellowed. Not freshly packed. The corners of the box were worn down, as if it had been handled many times before reaching me. That thought lingered. Many times before reaching me. I shook it lightly. No sound. Whatever was inside didn't shift. Didn't rattle. It remained completely still, as though fixed in place. I told myself again that this was just some elaborate online purchase, probably filled with random junk. Old objects meant to look unsettling, but ultimately harmless. That explanation was enough. At least, enough for me to reach for a knife. The blade slid under the tape with a dry, quiet sound. I hesitated for a moment when I reached the center, my hand pausing without any clear reason. Then I pushed through, cutting the rest of the seal. The flaps opened slowly.
There was a smell this time.
Not strong, not rotten, just old, like something that had been sealed away for years without air. It wasn't immediately unpleasant, but it made my chest feel tight. Inside the box, there was no packing material, no foam, no paper, nothing to cushion whatever was inside. Just a single object, wrapped in dark cloth. The fabric was thick and rough, tied tightly with a thin cord. It looked aged, almost brittle at the edges. As I reached in, I noticed something strange. The cloth wasn't dusty. It should have been. Everything else about the box suggested age and neglect. But the cloth felt recently handled.
Warm even.
I pulled it out and set it on the table. For a moment, I didn't unwrap it. I just looked at it. There was a shape beneath the cloth. Irregular. Not perfectly square or round. Something in between. The size of a small book, maybe. Or a compact box. My fingers moved to the cord. I untied it slowly, the knot loosening with surprising ease. The cloth shifted slightly as I pulled it away, revealing what was underneath. It was a wooden box. Darker than the outer packaging. Smooth but worn. The surface was covered in faint carvings, almost invisible unless the light hit them at the right angle. I leaned closer, trying to make them out. Symbols. Not letters. Not anything I recognized. They were carved deeply, but softened by time, as if they had been touched repeatedly over years.
There was no lock.
Just a lid. I placed my hand on it and paused again. That same hesitation.
Stronger this time.
Something about the box felt wrong. Not in a dramatic or obvious way. There was no sudden noise. No movement. Nothing supernatural in the moment. Just a quiet, persistent feeling that opening it might not be a good idea. I almost stopped. Almost. But curiosity has a way of overriding instinct, especially when nothing has gone wrong yet. So I opened it. Inside, there were 3 items. A photograph, a small cassette tape, and a folded piece of paper. That was it. No explanation. No note describing what any of it meant. Just those 3 things, placed carefully inside the wooden box. I picked up the photograph first. It showed a room. At least, I think it was a room. The image was grainy, poorly lit. Taken with an old camera, maybe. The walls were bare. The floor was concrete. There was a single chair in the center, facing away from the camera. Someone was sitting in it, but I couldn't see their face. Only the back of their head. Their posture looked unnatural.
Too still.
Too rigid. As if they had been placed there rather than sitting naturally. I flipped the photograph over. There was writing on the back.
A date. And a time.
Nothing else. The date was from nearly 15 years ago. I felt a slight chill. Then I set it down and picked up the cassette tape. It was labeled, but the ink had faded. I could only make out a few letters. Not enough to form a clear word. The plastic casing was scratched, worn from use. I didn't own a cassette player. Not anymore. Which made the tape feel even more out of place. Like it belonged to a different time. I turned it over in my hands, listening instinctively for any sound inside. Nothing. Just silence. Finally, I unfolded the piece of paper. It was creased several times, as if it had been folded and unfolded repeatedly. The edges were frayed. The paper itself felt thin, fragile. There was a single sentence written in the center. The handwriting matched the text on the outer box.
Small. Careful.
Deliberate. Play the tape before you look again. I read it twice. Then a third time. It didn't make sense. Before you look again. Look at what? The photograph? The box? The room around me? I felt that same unease creeping back in, stronger now. More defined. Less easy to dismiss. I placed the paper back on the table and glanced at the photograph again. The figure in the chair. Something about it. I leaned closer. Just slightly. And that's when I realized something I was certain hadn't been there before. The angle of the head had changed. Not by much. Just enough to make it look like the person in the chair was no longer facing completely away, but slightly to the side. As if they were beginning to turn, but I didn't move for several seconds. At first, I convinced myself it was a mistake. A problem with memory. The kind of small detail the mind fills in incorrectly when you're not paying full attention. I told myself I hadn't studied the photograph closely enough the first time, that I had assumed the figure was facing completely away, when in reality, it had always been slightly turned. That explanation felt reasonable. It should have been enough. But something didn't sit right. I reached out and picked up the photograph again, holding it closer to the light. The grain made it difficult to see fine details, but the outline of the head was clearer now. The angle was subtle, but unmistakable. The person in the chair was no longer facing directly forward. They were turned slightly toward the camera. Not enough to reveal their face. Just enough to suggest awareness. I felt a slow, tightening sensation in my chest. This wasn't possible. Photographs don't change. I set it back down carefully, almost gently, as if any sudden movement might disturb something. My eyes shifted toward the cassette tape. Play the tape before you look again. The sentence on the paper repeated itself in my mind, louder now. More insistent. Before you look again. A quiet, creeping thought followed it. What happens if I don't? I stepped back from the table. The apartment felt different now. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but in a way that's hard to explain. The air felt heavier. The silence more complete. Even my own breathing sounded distant, like it didn't fully belong in the room. I looked around, half expecting to notice something else out of place. Everything seemed normal. The furniture hadn't moved. The lights hadn't flickered. The door was still locked. But the feeling remained. I turned back to the table. The photograph sat where I had left it. The cassette tape beside it. The folded paper just behind. Waiting. I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. I hadn't realized how late it had gotten. There was a small electronics shop a few blocks away. The kind that sold outdated equipment, old radios, used speakers, things most people didn't have a use for anymore. I had passed by it countless times without ever going inside. They might have a cassette player. The thought came quickly, almost instinctively. And once it was there, it didn't leave. I hesitated only briefly before grabbing my jacket. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the normal sounds of the building returned. Distant footsteps. A door closing somewhere below. The faint hum of electricity running through the walls. It felt relieving. Grounding. I walked quickly, not giving myself time to reconsider. The streets were mostly empty. A few cars passed by, their headlights cutting through the darkness in short bursts. The shop was still open, its interior dimly lit by a single overhead light. The man behind the counter barely looked up when I entered. He was older, mid-60s maybe, thin, with tired eyes that didn't seem interested in much of anything. "I need a cassette player," I said. He nodded once, as if he had been expecting that exact request. No questions. No curiosity. He turned, reached behind the counter, and pulled out a small, rectangular device. It looked used but functional. He placed it on the counter between us. "That's all I've got," he said. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "How much?" He named a price. I paid without arguing. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Be careful with old recordings." I paused. "What do you mean?" He shrugged slightly, already looking away. "They don't forget things the way people do." There was no explanation. No follow-up. Just that single sentence. I left the shop with a strange, unsettled feeling settling deeper into my thoughts. By the time I returned to the apartment, the silence had returned with me. It was waiting. I closed the door behind me and locked it. The box was still on the table, exactly where I had left it, but something about the arrangement felt off. I stepped closer. The photograph.
It was no longer lying flat.
It was tilted slightly, one corner lifted just enough to catch the light differently. I was certain I hadn't left it like that. A quiet pressure built at the back of my mind, urging me not to overthink it, to treat it as coincidence. A shift caused by air movement, maybe. Something small. Something explainable. I ignored the thought. Instead, I focused on the tape. I placed the cassette player on the table and inserted the tape. The mechanism clicked softly as it settled into place. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I pressed play. There was a brief hiss of static.
Low. Faint.
Almost comforting in its familiarity. Then silence. Several seconds passed. I leaned closer, listening carefully. Nothing. Just the soft, continuous hum of the device. I frowned and adjusted the volume. Still nothing. Then, just as I began to think the tape was empty,
A sound. Faint. Distant.
a voice. At first, it was too quiet to make out any words. Just a low, uneven whisper buried beneath layers of static. I turned the volume higher, straining to hear. The voice grew clearer.
Male.
Unsteady. Not supposed to. The words cut in and out, as if the recording itself was struggling to hold together. "If you're listening, it means..." A long stretch of static interrupted the sentence. Then, suddenly, a sharp noise, like something being knocked over. The voice returned, louder this time. Urgent. "Don't look at it again." My breath caught. "It doesn't stay the same, it changes when you're not." The tape warped briefly, the sound distorting into a harsh, metallic screech before settling again. I thought it was just a picture, just a room. Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. When the voice came back, it was different. Lower. More controlled. "It knows when you're watching." A chill ran through me. I glanced, almost involuntarily, toward the photograph. It was still there. But I didn't look directly at it. Not yet. I made the mistake. I kept checking every time it moved just a little more. The voice trembled now. Don't do that. There was a faint sound in the background of the recording. Hard to identify, like breathing, or something shifting slowly against a hard surface. There's more in the frame now, there wasn't before. The words felt heavier with each sentence. It's closer. A sudden, loud crack of static filled the room, making me flinch. Then silence. The tape continued to spin for a few seconds before stopping on its own. The room felt colder, quieter, like something had settled into place. I sat there, unmoving, the last words echoing in my mind. There's more in the frame now. Slowly, against my better judgment, I turned my head and looked at the photograph.